Hello, and welcome back to the Forbidden Knowledge Podcast. I am your host, Nathaniel Heutmaker. Today, we'll be going back into the Arthurian myth and tradition. This time, we'll be talking about a poem that I had just discovered. It's called the Elucidation. It's a very, very short poem. It's an anonymous poem that was made in about the 1220s or so, is what it seems to be, circa that time period, maybe a little later. And it seems to be something that has to do with what one could call like the fairy agreement, the fairy accord. It makes references to multiple other Arthurian myths and traditions, at least so far as I can tell. I'm still obviously in the beginning of researching all this stuff, so it'll take some time for me to get used to seeing everything just yet. As I'm taking this journey with you all at the same time as I'm actually doing it. I know last time we said we are going to talk more about Wolfram von Aschenbach's Parsifal, but this particular one really caught my eye, and I'm going with it instead for the time being. One of the things that it talks about is the fairies, as I mentioned before. So this is something that I know very little about, something I'm going to have to deep dive myself and learn more about that particular aspect of it. I can flat out tell you from the limited information that I do have that they are not this diminutive, meaning small creatures that are sprite-like or whatever. That was a romantic notion that was created literally in the Romance period by the people that were doing so in the Victorian era, which means that what we are used to thinking of them as small little creatures that have wings that are, flitting around us and that kind of stuff, like Tinkerbell or whatever. That's not how they actually are. They seem much more akin to what we would see in Lord of the Rings in terms of kind of like an elven thing. I'm not saying we should equate them with elves. I'm saying that they seem to be closer to that based upon my current understanding of them and the little bit of research that I've done into that. It is quite clear that, at least in the tradition that is in the Elucidation, that the particular story that's being told here about the fairies and whatnot is the fact that they themselves represent another realm, and that there's a spiritual component rather than just the physical realm that we currently all understand around us at this particular point in time period. And you have where these fairies, specifically maidens that there are, they are guarding these wells. And when someone comes to these wells, they make it so that way they give them food and respite from their travels and that kind of stuff, type of hospitality, if you will, that anybody can get. It doesn't matter who they are or why they're there and that kind of stuff with it. And each one of these fairies has a golden cup, as it is referred to, and whatnot. My suspicion is that this is something that is a holdout from a traveler thing with the Celtic peoples and Gaelic peoples that are there, and even potentially the Breton peoples themselves and Pictish peoples and whatnot. I do know for a fact that the Nordic peoples had this idea of when someone was coming to their place that they needed to make it so that way these travelers, as long as they were not there to do any harm to them, of course, were welcomed, and that they were to be given all benefits of the doubt and make it so that way they were given great hospitality with great food, a place of lodging to stay, and all that other stuff with it. This is a theme that was there. It seems to be a theme that's with these other groups of people that we're studying and that kind of stuff, which makes it so that way it's highly probable that if that is the case, that it is a Indo-European type idea, which is most certainly the case to a certain extent. So we see this happening with it, but then we also see that, unfortunately, there's this king named Agamemnon who decides that he's going to violate the maidens of these wells, quite literally, and rape them. And then his men go and do the same thing, and then they are taken and abducted away. And when that happens, it makes it so that way we start getting a wasteland, and that there is destruction throughout the entire country of Logros, as it's called. Now, Logros is a name for the British Isles, which would in this case would include Ireland, it would include Scotland, it would include Wales, it would include England, it would include the Isle of Man, and all the surrounding territories that are immediately part of the United Kingdom and Ireland. So that's what I mean by British Isles on that particular front there. And so it's the entire kingdom that is now in disarray because of this violation of the hospitality of the maidens and them getting to do anything for people that come by with it. According to the story, the poem that is, which is only about 484 lines long, which sounds like it might be a long thing, but if you were to print it out in a book, it would maybe be 10 pages or less. One of the things that happens on that particular story idea is that it mentions that there are 7 attempts at the Grail and 7 parts to the story and whatnot. So this immediately brings to mind a couple of ideas that are happening there. You have 7 chakra systems and 7 centers for what's going on there. And for those of you who think that that is a huge stretch and that is just a Eastern idea, that is simply put not the case. We can see this notion inside of Kabbalah where it is Western mysticism that goes on there using specific notions that are happening with it. They have what are called dual chakras, one that are expressed inwardly and one that are expressed outwardly, making it so that way you have more chakras than just the 7 in terms of how they are understood, but in reality there are only 7. We also have to where the Vedic tradition is 100% from the Indo-European groups or the Proto-Indo-European groups, which include the Nordic people and, of course, the most importantly, the ones that we're studying, the Gaelic/Celtic people and Breton people. And so when you add all that together for what's going on, you get to where there's a direct connection between the two sides for it. I will give you an example of this for what's happening. Inside of the Nordic tradition, just very briefly, there is something that's called the Dis or the Disir, which has to do with basically all the female entities in general. And you have in the Vedic tradition, you have some entity that is known as the Dasana. And Disir and Disana are cognates with one another. They come from the same etymological roots for what it is. And there's other things that prove definitively that the Vedic tradition is completely wrapped up with the Indo-European side of things, and that the notion of there being a chakra type system for what's that would be for the Western civilization, the Western side of things, and then not just the Eastern side for this is very easy to understand and see that there are connections there that would make that very possible and plausible. I'm not saying it is definitively the case. I'm saying that it seems very likely that it's talking about that. And by activating each one of these chakras, each one of these branches of the story, that makes it so that way the whole entirety of the Grail's quest and tradition can be revealed properly. Now, why am I bringing that up? Well, clearly it has to do with the spiritual understanding of things that are going on here. Otherwise, you wouldn't have these otherworldly beings that are being talked about in terms of fairies and an accord that's broken that needs to be restored. You also have to where you have the candelabra, right, which is the 7 branched thing that you see for the candles and whatnot, the menorah, as it's also called. And so when you have that aspect of it as well, it could be another reference to those aspects to bring it. There's 7 days of the week, and those 7 days of the week were based upon gods, and in this case, planetary bodies specifically. You have to where the 7 planetary bodies that are on that particular thing would be what we could see with the naked eye. And so on that particular front, it would be the Sun, the Moon, Venus, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn. All of these are planetary bodies that can be seen with the naked eye. And all of our days are named after these planets in some form or another for what's happening. You can see this with Sunday is the day of the sun. Monday is the day of the moon. You have Tuesday, which is the day of Mercury and whatnot. Mars, sorry. Then you have Wednesday, which is Mercredi in French, which would give us Mercury in terms of the planet. You have Friday, which is associated with the goddess Frigg or Freya, which gives us Venus, because you have Vendredi in French, the Venus, for what's going on there. You have Saturday, which is Saturn, of course, and then you have Thursday, which is Thor's Day, named after the Norse god Thor, and which would be Jupiter, if you put it all together for what's going on there. And so it should just be a reference to these various different planetary bodies and making it so they're all aligned for what's going on there too. I don't think it's a coincidence that it's a number 7 is the point. I think that there's another connection to all these things that need to be laid out on that front because there are these other branches that need to be discovered here. It makes it so that way we have to obviously read a lot more of the traditions in order to bring them together and piece it together and see if there is. Problem is, some of these stories may not have survived. The poem that I'm talking about here is pretty much ignored by most scholars because they don't like it. It doesn't fit for what they want to look into, which is dumb in my opinion because again that means you're electing to ignore information that potentially fill in gaps for what's going on. The Elucidation makes references to, Percival that was written by Chrétien de Troyes, who is the first medieval scholar to go and do this for the Christian mindset and bring that into that side of things with it. Obviously, it pulls from Parzival, it pulls from the first continuation, the second continuation, etc. In other words, this is supposed to explain why certain events happened. That's why it's named the Elucidation, and that it's going to give the entirety of the understanding of the tradition to it. Unfortunately, I don't know if it actually does or not at this stage. I know that it tantalizes and teases its reader that it will. And maybe it seems like it can't do it in its 484 lines, but until those 484 lines are deep dived and until the 84 lines are gone and looked at the other traditions that exist with it, it would be very difficult for me to say one way or another. So you have that particular front with it. There's lots of things that need to be deep dived here. I just thought I'd give you an update on what I have been personally doing, what I've been personally researching during this time period. I expect to be doing more updates more quickly. The plan is to try to make it so that way it's not that far behind in comparison to real world stuff that I'm doing. So I will be putting out probably a couple videos a week potentially. They're going to be shorter, like this one is, 10 to 15, maybe 20 minutes long, and just kind of letting know where I'm at, what I've researched, what I haven't researched, what's going on there. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I've been looking into this poem. It's called the Elucidation. Some people have referred to it as the Lost Book of the Grail. It really seems to tie a lot of stuff together from the limited information that I've been able to pull from. And it is quite clear that there's lots of stuff that's going on there. It talks about various different battles. It talks about the Swan Knight. It talks about making it so that way the Knights of the Round Table that King Arthur had, that they want to get vengeance on the descendants of the people who did this to the Maidens of the Well and the fairy people. But then they learn certain things to prevent that from happening. So anyway, we'll go and deep dive more of this as time goes on and things make themselves more apparent. But that's what I've been trying to figure out at this stage of things. And so I thank you all for coming with me on this particular journey that I have done here. The stories will become more and more clear as we get further and further into it for the information that's happening with it, and I'm going to be pulling from my extensive knowledge that I already have while adding to it at the same time. And so I hope you found this entertaining and somewhat useful for the next stages of what's going on here. I'll see you in a couple days. Thank you.